On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we take a final look back at the 2024-25 Lightning season and a final look back at my time with the show, as unfortunately, this is my last episode of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone. Josh Sperber here, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And we're going to take a look back at the year that was. We're on the 2025 portion of the schedule, starting with March, which had the Lightning play the most games in a calendar month this NHL season. And they won the most games in a calendar month this NHL season. 9-5-1 was the Bolts' record in the month of March. And it started off with a victory against the Washington Capitals. The Bolts finishing with the 8th straight win over Washington before a loss to the Florida Panthers, where the offense never really got off to the level that you'd expect. 7 power play chances, no goals, and 2 goals from Alexander Barkov in the second period were enough for the Florida Panthers. Braden Point got the Lightning's only goal early in the third period, but they weren't able to bridge the gap. And that was kind of a tough loss for the Tampa Bay Lightning for a lot of reasons. And it sent the Bolts on an interesting next couple of games because they bounced right back against Columbus. But then things looked kind of dicey in a 6-5 win over the Buffalo Sabres. It was a game that, if you look at the scoreboard, it seemed like the Lightning had it well in hand, but just every time they scored, it seemed like the Sabres were right there. Nick Paul scored the Lightning's first goal in the opening period. 15 seconds later, Rasmus Dahlin puts one in for Buffalo. Darren Raddysh scores another one to give the Lightning the lead, and then the Lightning give up 2 more heartbreaking goals towards the end of the period that put Buffalo out in front. And it just kind of kept going back and forth like that. It seemed like the Sabres had an answer for whatever the Lightning did. And once Buffalo got up 5-3, the Lightning staged their comeback. And this was the first game after the Yanni Gourde-Oliver Bjorkstrand trade. And Oliver Bjorkstrand ended up putting in the winning goal with Yanni Gourde getting the assist. Both of them got their first points as a Bolt in 2025, as obviously Yanni Gourde had plenty of other times to get some points for Tampa Bay. But they combined for their first point as a Bolt in 25 on the game-winning goal. Very poetic ending to the game, but that game kind of, set the tone for really how the Lightning season would end, because you could see the flashes of brilliance. You could see a team that is able to score with anyone. And, if they get down, they're able to fight their way back. But you also saw a team that allowed goals off of a number of defensive mistakes. And that is essentially how the Lightning season ended when it came to the postseason as well. The Lightning were able to score with Florida for most of the series, but when it came down to it, defensive mistakes, miscues just kind of bit the Lightning in the behind, and it ended up being the Panthers taking home the playoff series. And the Lightning had a couple of other games after that Sabres game where you just didn't know where the offense went. And they had a 4-0 loss to Boston the Saturday after the comeback win against the Buffalo Sabres, where you just wondered the entire game what was going on with Tampa's offense. Then the next game, the Tuesday after that, they play the Carolina Hurricanes, and it's the same thing. 3 goals for Carolina in the first period, and you're just sitting there wondering what's going on with Tampa because they're getting their chances, they're getting their shots, but just the offense didn't seem to be working. 3 straight losses after that 6-5 win for the Sabres before a 3-game win streak, and this was just kind of a back and forth month where the Lightning were trading consecutive losses and consecutive wins for the most part. And I'll be honest, I remember being pretty high on the Lightning's playoff chances for most of the season, especially after how February went. They really looked like they were going to be a dark horse team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. You know, they really looked like a team that had a chip on their shoulder and was ready to shake off the whole narrative of, you know, they lost Steven Stamkos, they're rebuilding. They looked ready to shake that off in the playoffs. But the first time that I really doubted the Tampa Bay Lightning over the course of a series was in the month of March, and it was really that second loss in the shootout to the Flyers that did it. It was the final loss of a 3-game losing streak, and another one of those games where it just seemed like Philadelphia, of all teams, had an answer for everything that the Lightning did. And there were times that Tampa looked like they could surge ahead for good, especially at the beginning of that second period when Zemgus Girgensons put in his second and final goal of the season to give the Lightning a 2-1 edge. But then, you know, halfway through the period, the Flyers add another one, and then Poehling puts one in with less than a minute left. Cam Atkinson tied it early in the third, and then it went to a shootout for the second time. Tampa Bay Lightning took a loss against Philadelphia in a shootout. And, you know, you don't like to look on paper, but on paper, the Flyers are a team that the Lightning should have been able to beat a lot more times than one over the course of the NHL season. But, I mean, those games, just the Flyers were able to get the number of Philadelphia over the course of the season. And Philly ended up coming back to Tampa on St. Patrick's Day and having a game that I think better encapsulated the difference between the two teams. A 2-0 shutout win at home for Tampa. Only time they beat Philly this season, they would end up taking the season series. But the month of March, you know, showed the potential of Tampa Bay, a couple of different win streaks, 3 games in a row after that shootout loss, 3 games in a row to end off the month of March as well. But I think it really just showed the defensive weaknesses of Tampa Bay. And it just proves the thing that I've been saying really all offseason so far. And I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that the Lightning need to retool their defense and step up defensively if they're going to contend for a Stanley Cup next season. Because defensively, turning into offense, that Lightning unit was virtually unparalleled. One of the top scoring defensive units in the entire NHL. But just too many defensive miscues for Tampa Bay led to goals, whether it's careless passing in their own zone or just, not being able to move the puck up the ice and just getting caught sleeping in transition. There were too many defensive mistakes and they really reared their ugly head in the final couple months of the season. The Lightning just, with some injuries definitely adding to it, but the Lightning just kind of ran out of gas towards the end of the season, I think, and that affected the team during the month of March, and that kind of carried on to April and, of course, the tough playoff series loss to the Florida Panthers. And that's where we'll go next in the final segment of recapping this past season for Tampa Bay. March kind of was where the wheels began to fall off for Tampa Bay, and they came off completely in the final month of the NHL season. And we're going to talk about how you could kind of see the blood in the water towards the end of April, leading in to that playoff series disappointment against the Florida Panthers. So we'll look through the month of April in our last look at the 2024-25 NHL season for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. And we talked about kind of seeing the blood in the water in April for Tampa Bay heading into the postseason series. But, I mean, April really saw both sides of the Tampa Bay Lightning coin. You saw the team that could come up with tough wins, that could beat the Florida Panthers handily. But you also saw the Lightning team that just didn't always have it towards the end of games. The Lightning won 4 games, went 4-2-3 in the regular season over the month of April, and then obviously lost 4 of 5 against the Panthers in the postseason. And, you know, it was just another kind of back and forth month where you saw some games, the Lightning playing to their potential. Every single one of Tampa Bay's wins, including the 5-1 victory over the Panthers in the postseason, was a win by 3 goals or more. They began the month with an April Fool's Day win over the Islanders, 4-1, a 5-1 win over the Rangers a week later. Then 2 of the final 3 games, they won 7-4 over the Sabres at home, 5-1 over the Panthers at home. And, you know, they just kind of came apart really after that Panthers game. I think that game against Florida, you know, the last home game of the season, the Lightning really played one of their best games of the year. They left it all out on the ice, and they sealed second in the division. They started out hot early. Point got the first goal about 90 seconds in. You know, they did just about everything you'd want them to do against a playoff team like the Florida Panthers. They matched the physicality. They shut down Florida on the power play. They outshot them. They won more faceoffs. You know, any way you slice it, the Lightning just dominated the Florida Panthers, even down to the eventual answer with Darren Radish's power play goal, putting the icing on the cake of a 5-1 victory after Marchand scored a minute after Nikita Kucherov made it 4-0 to start the second period. But, I mean, I remember watching that game and thinking and just being full of excitement for Tampa Bay in the postseason. You know, they looked like they had done everything they needed to do. They had the formula to beat the Florida Panthers. It was an even regular season series. You didn't really see a huge disparity in between the two teams, and certainly didn't expect Florida to dominate the series the way that they did. But, I mean, that is exactly what ended up happening. And, you know, you can look through some of these games and see where the signs were. The fact that the Lightning lost 3 games in overtime, well, 2 in overtime at home, 1 in a shootout. All 3 of those losses past the end of regulation were against divisional teams. And, you look at those 3 games. If I think the Lightning had won one of those games, maybe things would have been different. If they had won all 3, things really could have been different. But I think definitely some air were let out of the Lightning's tires after that 4-3 loss to the Maple Leafs, partly because that essentially won Toronto the Atlantic Division. The Lightning were kind of creeping up on the rest of the Atlantic. They had caught the pace of Florida. They had caught the pace of Toronto. But they just, and that game against the Leafs seemed like a winnable game. 2-0 lead for the Leafs in the first period. The Lightning scored the next 2 goals to tie it up. Then, about a minute after, Bjorkstrand got the tying goal on the power play. Leafs were on a power play. Matthew Knies gets one in. It took the Lightning a while, but they tied it up. And then within the first 3 minutes of overtime, Knies completed the hat trick. The Leafs took the win and essentially grabbed the Atlantic Division. And I think if you're looking to any game in the regular season that foretold the Lightning falling short in the playoffs, that was it right there. Because the Lightning had chances in the postseason as well. They had chances against the Leafs in that April 9th loss, but they weren't able to follow through. They weren't able to put up those clutch Lightning offensive attacks like they had so many times before in the regular season. And it kind of opened your eyes to the fact that the Lightning had really lost their ability to take over games, because so many times towards the beginning of the season, the Lightning would fall down even in just a 1-goal hole and be able to come back. But by the end of the year, it just seemed like whoever scored the first goal would end up taking the win. And that's not a way to win playoff series. And, going towards the postseason, it was easy to try and overlook the last game of the regular season. I know I was one to just kind of shove it off, shrug my shoulders, and ignore it, because the Lightning really, they played everybody, because it's not like they're just going to exchange their entire team to the AHL or something like that just to give guys rest. They played their top lines just less. Of all the forwards, Yanni Gourde and Gage Gonzalez were the top 2, with Gonzalez playing over 21 minutes of ice time. And, the third liners, the fourth liners got more time. Lightning rested a lot of their starters for most of the game. So, it was easy to say, all right, the Lightning played their fourth liners and their third liners more. They were just giving everyone a rest. Chesterkin had a great game. This is a fluke leading into the postseason, but it ended up kind of foreshadowing how the Lightning dropped off in the postseason. No goals were scored in the first period. Lightning held the Rangers to 2 shots in that opening period. Then, a little bit after the first minute of the second period, a shorthanded goal came in for the Rangers. They took a lead that they would not surrender. And I think I also wanted to attribute that game to the Lightning just, letting Sam Rosen have his moment. The legendary play-by-play announcer for the Rangers retired after that 4-0 Rangers win. But it just showed that the Lightning had kind of run out of gas, and you could kind of see the signs of it there. And then throughout the rest of that postseason series, it just seemed like the Panthers were a step ahead of Tampa Bay at every instance on that ice. And it really reared its ugly head in the postseason. We don't need to go into too much detail about that postseason series. Just the injuries didn't help. Bobrovsky had a great series, and the Lightning made too many mistakes on defense. It was just a perfect storm against the Lightning. And, you really thought that they could make a comeback in the playoffs after that third game. But just another late rally from the Panthers. All three of their goals, tying the game at 2, taking the lead, and then the empty netter. All of those goals came in the last 4 minutes of the third period when it really seemed like the Lightning were going to get back in this series. And it was just one of those, you blink and you miss it for Tampa Bay. It really looked like in those last couple of minutes that the Lightning were going to tie up that series. But, maybe Ekblad should have been taken out of the game for a dirty hit that he had that ended up injuring Brandon Hagel. And after that, it was Ekblad who played a big role in the Panthers coming back and taking that game when it really looked like the Lightning had it, and they just didn't. So a tough way to end the season for Tampa Bay. And I think that a big thing the Lightning need to address, I think it was made very clear that defense needs to be the top priority in this coming offseason. And the Lightning are still maybe a couple pieces away from going back to that championship contending team. But the Panthers just outplayed them in the postseason, and it was a tough way for Tampa to lose. And got a tough segment coming up next because it will be my last one. I've got plenty of people to thank and a lot of fun moments from the Lightning season to look back on as I say my goodbye to Locked On Lightning. Well, this is my last segment on Locked On Lightning. Unfortunately, just couldn't work out with my schedule. I really loved being able to kind of tell the story of the Tampa Bay Lightning season over the course of this year. And I have to start off with a bunch of thank yous, which I'll probably repeat myself a lot, but there are just, I think, too many people to say thank you. Too many people that helped get me here and helped support me during my time over this past year with Locked On Lightning. And it's something that I probably have to start and end this segment saying thank you to. Of course, David Locke, the owner, founder, operator, podcaster for Locked On in general. I have nothing but love and respect for him and just this entire company at Locked On. I think it's a great thing to have one, end all be all place that you can get every single one of your teams on a daily podcast. And it was just great to be a part of. Tom Lee was the man who initially hired me for this. It was a long hiring process, but I really appreciate him putting his trust in me to take the reins of this show over the course of this season. And Sean Woodley as well, the channel manager for Locked On's NHL channel. I was pretty clueless for a lot of this year, and if it wasn't for Sean, I don't think I'd be in front of this camera talking to you guys right now. He was so helpful in kind of getting me on my feet, making sure that I was, I was on top of everything and sending out my shorts and everything like that, and making sure that I was there putting up some content for you guys on a daily basis. So I really want to thank Sean and the Locked On NHL channel for kind of bringing me on as a part of the team over the course of this season. And for me, this was a dream come true. I've always said that I wanted to be the guy covering the games that I was watching on television anyway, and being able to be a credentialed media member, for the Tampa Bay Lightning, for an NHL team was truly an honor. And it was a lot of fun to just be in that press box and, be able to just be a part of the Tampa Bay Lightning coverage over the course of this past NHL season. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Lightning media relations team, Stephen Buck, Chris Kren, Brian Briesman, really accepting, really helpful, and, patient with me in the fact that I couldn't make as many of the games as I would have liked to over the course of the season. But the Lightning have an excellent media relations team that's so helpful and just so welcoming to all media members that are looking to cover the Tampa Bay Lightning and NHL hockey. So thank you to those guys. And of course, the Vinnick Sports Group for, being so welcoming in my time in the Tampa Bay Lightning press box. And I certainly hope to see you guys again at Amalie Arena, because it's going to take a lot to keep me out of there. I'll definitely be back. Watching Lightning games, being a fan, supporting the team, as my time with the podcast, unfortunately, has to come to an end. And of course, to you guys, everyone who watched, thank you. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage to listen to me ramble on about anything for 30 minutes a day, but you guys did that, and I really appreciate it. It's nice to know that my, musings, my thoughts on Tampa Bay didn't completely go unheeded, and that there are enough people that think that I'm worth listening to talking about the Bolts. So, of course, I thanked you guys after most episodes, I think, but I can't thank enough the fans, the supporters of this podcast who listened day in and day out and really made me feel heard and really made me feel like a respected member of this Bolts Nation, this Tampa Bay Lightning community. I just need to keep thanking everyone else at Locked On, all the support staff, the other Locked On NHL hosts. There are too many people to thank in this segment, but, the other hosts at Locked On really made me feel welcome and like a part of this team and a valued member of the Locked On Podcast Network. And, I could not have done this show over the last year without any of them. So a thank you to the whole Locked On team, a thank you to Bolts Nation, to all the people that listen to Locked On Lightning. Thank you. Too many people to thank, too many people that played a part in this last year. But it truly was an honor and a joy to be able to chat with you guys about the Tampa Bay Lightning over the course of the 24-25 season. And hopefully I'll be back in Bolts Nation one way or another over the course of the rest of my broadcasting career. So thank you all again for taking this ride with me. I hope you guys will keep listening to Locked On Lightning once someone else steps in and takes my place. But thank you all again for tuning in. Thank you all for making me feel heard and making my opinions somewhat matter about the Lightning over the course of the season. And thank you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen today and over this past season. Now, for your second listen, make sure to check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find Locked On NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And once again, thank you for listening to this podcast. And it is a see you later. Hopefully, I'll see some of you guys at Amalie Arena over the next season. Feel free to say hi. But thank you again for listening over the course of this last season. It has been a whole lot of fun, and I will certainly miss talking to you guys on Locked On Lightning every single day. But until I see you guys next, go Bolts, and thanks for tuning in.